What would you do if you were truly, completely alone? For Brett Thorne, loneliness wasn't a feeling. It was the sharp, biting wind of the Arizona Territory. But that all changed on the night of the blood moon, when the howls of wolves led her not to a deer, but to a man, a wounded man, an Apache man. Saving him would cost her everything, her home, her safety, her name. But she never, ever expected that the price of her kindness would be a warrior's heart, and a proposal she never saw coming. The wind in Prospect's End had a name. Brett Thorne called it Silas, after the town sheriff, because both were cold, relentless, and stripped everything bare. Brett was a creature of the fringes. Her cabin, a one-room clapboard box left by her disgraced preacher father, clung to the last bit of scrubland before the territory gave way to the mesas. She was 20, but the sun and the solitude had carved lines of a much older woman around her eyes. Her only company was a one-eyed mule named Barnaby and the whispering ghosts of the saguaro cacti. She was, in a word, lonely. A loneliness so profound it felt like a second skin, or a coat of the fine red dust that covered everything she owned. On this night, the moon was a copper coin, hazy and red, casting the world in a sickly light. The wolves were singing. They'd been close for 3 days, drawn by the scent of her meager livestock, a few scrawny chickens. But tonight, the howling was different. It wasn't the yipping chorus of a hunt. It was the low, guttural snarl of a cornered prey standoff. And then she heard it, a sound that was not a wolf, a low, human groan. Brett wasn't brave. She was a survivor. Survivors don't investigate. They bar the door, check the single-shot rifle above the mantel, and pray for dawn. But the sound came again, a sharp cry of pain that cut through the canine growls. It was a sound she recognized, the sound of aloneness meeting its end. Cursing her own heart, she grabbed the rifle and a lit lantern. Barnaby huffed in his lean-to, a cloud of steam in the cold night air. "Hush, Barnaby," she whispered, her voice rusty. "I'm just looking." She crept toward the arroyo at the edge of her property, the lantern light a weak, trembling circle. The growling intensified. She saw them first, 5 sets of glittering eyes in the dark. A pack of gray wolves, circling something dark on the ground. Brett raised the rifle, her hands shaking. She didn't want to waste the bullet. "Get!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Get on now! Yeah!" The wolves, startled by the sudden human cry and the advancing light, hesitated. One, the alpha, a huge brute with a grizzled snout, snapped at the lantern glow. Brett aimed high and pulled the trigger. The crack of the rifle was a thunderclap in the silence. The bullet whined off a rock, far from any wolf, but the noise was enough. The pack scattered, melting back into the shadows of the chaparral, their eyes promising a return. Silence, thick and heavy, returned, all except for the rasping breath from the shadow on the ground. Brett stepped closer, lowering the lantern. It was a man. He was lying face down, his back a ruin of torn leather and dark, wet blood. But it wasn't the wolves who had done this. The ragged, bubbling hole in his side was the work of a bullet. She knelt, the lantern light falling across his high cheekbones and the shock of straight black hair. Her breath hitched. He wasn't a cowboy. He wasn't a prospector. He was Apache. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. This was worse than wolves. This was a death sentence. Sheriff Silas Vane paid a bounty for Apache scalps, to be found with a living one. The man groaned, trying to push himself up. His hand, slick with his own blood, closed around a chunk of turquoise rock. Please, he rasped, the one word, a desperate exhale. Brett looked at his face. He was young, maybe her age. His features contorted in a mask of agony. The savage she'd been taught to fear looked like a man, a dying man. She looked back at her dark, empty cabin, a place of crushing loneliness. Then she looked at the man who was dying, alone, in the dirt. Hell and damnation, she whispered, a curse her father would have beaten her for. She couldn't leave him. Her loneliness recognized his. All right, mister, all right. She slung the rifle over her shoulder. You're heavy. You're going to have to help. He didn't understand her words, but he understood the intent. With a grunt that was half sob, half war cry, he tried to get his legs under him. Brett grabbed him, her small frame straining under his dead weight. The coppery smell of his blood was thick in her nostrils. It took them 30 minutes to cover the 50 yards to her cabin, a stumbling, groaning nightmare crawl. She didn't take him inside the main room, too dangerous. Anyone riding by could see in the window. Instead, she hauled him to the storm cellar, a cramped, dirt-walled hole under the kitchen floor, smelling of potatoes and damp earth. She half lowered, half dropped him onto a pile of old burlap sacks. He collapsed, unconscious. Brett Thorne stood in the lantern light, her hands, her dress, her life, all suddenly covered in the blood of an Apache warrior. She stared at the trap door, her heart hammering a rhythm against her ribs. What have you done? What have you done? She'd rescued a man from the wolves, only to bring a far greater danger into her home. The first night was a blur of whispered prayers and boiling water. After securing Barnaby and checking the horizon for any riders drawn by the gunshot, Brett descended into the cellar. The man was burning with fever, his breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. She lit a second lantern, its glow making the small space feel like a tomb. She knew nothing about gunshot wounds, save that they needed to be cleaned. She tore a strip from one of her few good petticoats, her hands trembling. This is going to hurt, she whispered, as much to herself as to him. Lord, forgive me. She poured a splash of precious whiskey onto the cloth. He was unconscious, but his body arched in a silent scream as she pressed the alcohol-soaked rag to the wound. It was a terrible, messy thing. The bullet had gone in his side and hadn't come out. It was still in there, a lead poison. For 2 days, he drifted in delirium. Brett lived a strange, split life. By day, she did her chores, her movements stiff with anxiety. She scattered feed for the chickens, patched the mule's harness, and kept her eyes glued to the horizon. Every dust devil was a posse. Every hawk's cry was Sheriff Vane. By night, she slipped into the cellar, a ghost in her own home. She sat by his side, bathing his face with a cool cloth, forcing sips of willow bark tea, a trick her father had despised as heathen medicine, between his cracked lips. In his fever, he spoke. The words were a torrent of harsh guttural sounds that terrified and fascinated her. They were words of battle, of pursuit, and, she thought, of betrayal. He was beautiful, in the way a desert storm is beautiful, terrifying and elemental. His skin was the color of rich clay. A small, beaded amulet rested on his chest, which she gently moved aside as she tended to him. Once, his hand, fast as a snake, shot out and clamped around her wrist. His eyes, black and burning with fever, locked on hers. "Chizged!" he spat, the word a curse. "I'm not," she said, her voice shaking, but she didn't pull away. "I'm Brett Thorne. I'm helping." He stared at her, his mind struggling through the fever fog. He saw the worn-out dress, the chapped hands, the honest fear in her eyes. He didn't see a threat. He saw her. His grip loosened, his hand falling away. He slipped back into unconsciousness. On the third day, Brett knew she was in trouble. Her laudanum was gone, her bandages were foul, and she was out of coffee. The man's fever had broken, but a sickly yellow-green pus was oozing from the wound. Infection, blood poisoning. If she didn't get real medicine, her desperate act of kindness would be for nothing. He would die right here under her floor. She had to go to town. She stared at the man, who was now just a weak, breathing body. "You better not die while I'm gone," she muttered. "And you better not wake up and scalp my mule." She covered the trapdoor with the bearskin rug, kicked dirt over a few bloody rags she'd buried near the woodpile, and hitched Barnaby to the small wagon. The ride to Prospect's End was agony. The town sat in a dusty bowl, a collection of false-fronted buildings that all seemed to lean in on themselves. It was a town of whispers and hard-eyed men. Her first stop was Finch's general store. Jedediah Finch, a small, bird-like man with watery eyes, watched her come in. He was Silas Vane's man, his eyes and ears. "Miss Thorne?" he said, a thin, wet smile. "A pleasure. Not often we see you." "Mr. Finch?" Brett kept her eyes down. "I need supplies." She gathered her list. Flour, salt, coffee. Then she moved to the apothecary shelf. "And a bottle of laudanum, and carbolic acid, and all the bandages you have." Finch's smile faltered. He stopped wiping the counter. "That's quite the medical order, Miss Thorne. Planning on starting a hospital?" My mule," Brett said, her heart leaping into her throat. He got in a tangle with a bobcat, a bad one." Finch raised a skeletal eyebrow. "A bobcat, you say? Laudanum for a mule?" "To keep him calm," she snapped a bit too fast, "so I can stitch him." "Of course." Finch began to wrap the items, his movements slow, deliberate. He knew she was lying. She knew he knew. It was a suffocating, silent game. "Heard a gunshot out your way. 2, maybe 3 nights back. Everything all right on the homestead?" "Just the wolves. They get bold," Brett said, her voice flat. She pushed the coins across the counter, her hands shaking so badly one coin rolled off and wobbled on the floor. She was grabbing for it when the bat-wing doors of the saloon across the street swung open. Sheriff Silas Vane stepped out, buckling his gun belt. He was a big man, his bulk straining a black broadcloth vest. He saw her, and a slow, proprietary smile spread across his face. He'd been trying to buy her father's land, which was legally hers, for pennies on the dollar, claiming it was for her own protection. He sauntered across the street, his spurs ringing on the boardwalk. "Miss Thorne," he boomed, his voice like gravel. He tipped his hat, but his eyes were cold. "Always a fine day when you grace us with your presence." "Sheriff," Brett said, nodding, grabbing her package. Vane's eyes flicked to the package in her hand, noting the distinct shape of the laudanum bottle and the bulk of the bandages. He looked at Finch, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Heard you had some trouble," Vane said, blocking her path to the wagon. "Gunfire. Wolves. The territory is a hard place, Sheriff. You know that." "It is, especially for a woman, alone." His gaze traveled over her, possessive and cold. "That land of yours, it's drying up. My offer still stands. I'd hate for something to happen. A fire, maybe, or squatters." He used the word like a curse. "I am not a squatter, Sheriff. I am the owner. For now." He leaned in, his voice dropping. Folks are nervous. There's Apache on the move. A band of Chiricahua jumped a supply wagon near Benson, found the driver full of arrows. Brett felt the blood drain from her face. You look pale, Miss Thorne, Vane smiled. You see anything unusual out your way, you let me know. Anything at all. I will, Sheriff. She practically threw herself onto the wagon seat, whipping Barnaby into a trot. She didn't look back, but she could feel Silas Vane's eyes on her, a physical weight, all the way, until she was just a cloud of dust on the horizon. She'd gotten the supplies, but she'd also just painted a target on her back. The ride back was a blur of paranoia. Every rock looked like a man. Every gust of wind sounded like Vane's voice. When she reached the cabin, she flew from the wagon, leaving Barnaby harnessed, and tore open the trapdoor. Mister, are you— The cellar was dark. For a heart-stopping second, she thought he was dead. But then, a low voice from the shadows. Water. She nearly wept, with a strange, terrified relief. She lit the lantern. He was awake. Truly awake. The fever was gone, his black eyes clear and sharp, tracking her every move. He was weak, propped up on one elbow, but he was aware. She slowly descended the ladder, holding the lantern in one hand and a canteen in the other. She held it out. He watched her, his suspicion a palpable force in the small room. He didn't take it. It's just water, she said, her voice soft. I'm Brett. She set the canteen down, sliding it across the dirt floor until it touched his hip. Then she backed away, sitting on the bottom rung of the ladder. He watched her for a full minute, a standoff of silence. Then, with a pained grunt, he grabbed the canteen and drank, long and deep. Thank you, he said. The words were accented, but clear. Brett was stunned. You speak English. I speak— He paused, searching for the word. Enough. I was at— Reservation. San Carlos. I left. San Carlos, Brett breathed. She'd heard the name. It was a place of disease and starvation, a prison camp. You are— Ndi, she said, using the Apache word for the people she'd heard him murmur in his fever. His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. You know this word. You said it, she said quickly. In your sleep. I'm not— I won't hurt you. He studied her again, his gaze unnervingly intense. You— shot. The India— the white men. They shot me. Why you— help? The wolves, she said, gesturing vaguely. I couldn't leave you. He didn't seem to understand. In his world, a white woman finding a wounded Apache meant one of two things. She ran for help, or she put a bullet in him herself. This caring was a mystery. I have medicine, she said, holding up the package from Finch's. For the hurt. It will sting. She knelt beside him, uncorking the carbolic acid. He didn't flinch, but she saw the muscles in his jaw bunch. He was preparing for the pain. My name, he said, his voice a low rasp as she began to clean the wound. Is Taza. Taza, she repeated. It felt heavy on her tongue. Why? Inda? Shoot you? She asked, her grammar fraying to match his. Taza's face darkened. Finch, he spat, and Brett's heart stopped. Jedediah Finch. He— trade. Rifles. For gold. My father. Nantan. Chief. He paid. But the rifles— Chiskid. He made a braking motion with his hands. They explode. They are traps. I came to talk. Finch, he shot me. To hide his— lie. Brett's blood ran cold. Finch. Not just a nosy shopkeeper, but a man who sold faulty weapons to the Apache and then murdered them to cover it up. And Sheriff Vane, Vane was his protector. This was so much bigger than she thought. She wasn't just hiding a man. She was hiding the evidence of a conspiracy. He knows, Brett whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Finch and Sheriff Vane. They suspect me. They came to my cabin. No, they were in town. Before Taza could answer, a new sound cut through the air. The sound of hooves. Not one horse, but several, and they were coming fast. Brett! A voice boomed from outside. It was Sheriff Vane. Brett Thorne, I know you're in there. Brett's face went white. She looked at Taza. He was already moving, dragging himself into the deepest, darkest corner of the cellar, behind a stack of potato sacks. His hand went to the knife at his waist, a knife she hadn't even noticed. Don't, she whispered. A plea. Please. Brett, open this door. Vane was off his horse, his heavy boots stomping on her porch. I'm coming, Brett yelled, her voice trembling. She grabbed a basket of potatoes, as if she'd been fetching them, and climbed the ladder. She slammed the trapdoor shut, threw the bearskin rug over it, and kicked a small chair on top of the rug, her mind racing. She opened the cabin door, squinting into the afternoon sun. Sheriff Vane was there, his face thunderous. With him were 2 deputies, and, his presence a cold shock, Jedediah Finch, who was sitting on his horse, looking pale and righteous. Sheriff, Mr. Finch, Brett said, wiping her dusty hands on her apron. What a surprise. Cut the act, Miss Thorne, Vane snapped. Mr. Finch and I were talking about your purchases, laudanum, bandages, for a mule. He's not well, Brett stammered. And the gunshot, Vane continued, stepping inside her cabin, his eyes scanning everything. The one you said was just wolves. Funny thing. My deputy, he found this not 50 yards from your arroyo. Vane reached into his pocket and threw something on her small kitchen table. It spun and settled. A spent .44 caliber cartridge. This, Vane said, his voice dangerously low, ain't from no wolf hunting rifle. This is a pistol cartridge, the kind a man might use in a disagreement. Brett's mouth was dry. I don't know anything about that. I think you do. Vane walked the small room. He kicked the leg of her bed. He ran a hand over her cold stove. Mr. Finch is concerned. He thinks you might be aiding a fugitive. A fugitive? Brett laughed, a high, thin sound. Who would I be aiding? My mule? An Apache. Finch's reedy voice cut in from the doorway. The one who attacked me. He attacked you? Vane asked, playing his part. Tried to rob my store. I shot him, Finch lied, but he got away. He's wounded bad. And now, he pointed a shaking finger at Brett. She buys all these supplies. Brett, Vane said, his voice turning syrupy and false. Tell me you ain't harboring a redskin. After all they did. After they killed your own mother. Brett flinched. The old pain was sharp. Her mother had been killed in an Apache raid 10 years ago. It was the event that had broken her father and turned him into a fire and brimstone tyrant. Get out, she whispered. What was that? Get out of my house. Vane's smile vanished. I am the law, girl. I can go where I please. He stomped his boot on the floor, hard, especially when I suspect an infestation. He stomped again, right over the trapdoor. Brett held her breath. From beneath the floorboards, there was a faint skittering sound. Vane froze. What? He said. Was that? Rats, Brett said immediately. The cellar is full of them, big ones. Vane looked at the bearskin rug. He looked at the chair on top of it. He looked at Brett's terrified, defiant face. Move the chair, he ordered. No. I said, move the chair. He shoved her hard against the wall. Brett cried out. Vane kicked the chair aside. He grabbed the rug and tore it back, revealing the iron ring of the trapdoor. Well, 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 he sneered. What's in the cellar, Miss Thorne? He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled his pistol, aimed it at the wooden door, and pulled the ring. The trapdoor flew open with a bang, slamming against the cabin floor. Silas Vane stood silhouetted against the bright doorway, his pistol aimed into the darkness. "Come on out, boy," he yelled. "Come out, or I start shooting." Brett screamed. "No, it's just potatoes. Rats. There's nothing down there." "Shut up, girl," Vane spat. He fired a shot into the darkness. The boom was deafening in the small cabin. Wood splintered. A potato sack burst. "Last chance," Vane yelled. Silence. "Finch," Vane ordered. "Light that lantern. We're going in." Finch, fumbling and pale, lit a lantern from the table and handed it to Vane. The sheriff held it down. The light illuminated the dirt steps, the damp walls, the sacks of potatoes, and nothing else. The cellar was empty. Brett stared, her mind reeling. Where? How? "See?" she said, her voice shaking with a relief so profound it made her knees weak. "I told you. Rats." Vane's face was a mask of thunder. He knew he'd been tricked. He knew she was lying. But the evidence was gone. He looked around the cellar again. "He was here," Vane muttered. "I can smell him." "You smell damp earth, Sheriff," Brett said, emboldened. "Now get out. You have no warrant." Vane climbed out of the cellar, his face dark red. He shoved the lantern at Finch. "This ain't over, girl," he growled. "You, or your land, one way or another." He stormed out of the cabin, his deputies following. Finch gave Brett one last terrified, venomous look before scurrying after them. Brett bolted the door and sagged against it, her entire body shaking. She listened until the sound of the hooves faded completely. Then she ran to the back of the cabin, to the tall, rickety wardrobe that held her father's old coats. She pulled it away from the wall. Behind it, a small section of the cabin's flimsy wall had been pulled loose. A dark, black-haired head emerged from the crawlspace under the cabin, followed by a pair of wide shoulders. It was Taza. He'd dug. While Vane was posturing on the porch, Taza had heard, and he'd used his knife to cut through the soft, rotting wood of the cellar's outer wall, escaping into the narrow, dusty space under the floorboards. He pulled himself into the room, collapsing on the floor, his face gray, with pain and effort. The gunshot wound had torn open. Blood was everywhere. "You are a fool," Brett wept, dropping to her knees beside him. "You could have bled to death. You saved me." Taza just looked at her. He'd heard Vane. He'd heard the threat, the slap, the gunshot. He'd heard her lie for him. "You lied," he panted. "For Ndee." "You're not Ndee to me," she said, frantically pressing her hands to the wound. You're Taza. Now hold still, you idiot. You're bleeding all over my floor." For the next week, a strange, quiet domesticity settled over the cabin. Taza was too weak to move, and Vane's threat made it too dangerous for him to stay in the cellar. He was in her house. Brett dragged her small cot near the fire, and Taza lay on her own bed, a trespass that felt shocking and, frighteningly, right. The barrier of their worlds dissolved in the quiet of the cabin. They taught each other. She would point. "Spoon." He would repeat it. "Spoon." Then he would point to his knife. "Besh." "Besh," she would try, the sound clumsy. He taught her water, too, bread, Dean, and danger, Haida. She taught him safe, rest, and friend. He watched her. He had never observed a white woman up close. He'd only seen them from a distance, pale, fragile things in wagons. But this instant, this woman, she was not fragile. He watched her split wood with an axe, her small frame swinging with surprising strength. He watched her meticulously check the horizon every 30 minutes. He watched her read from a small, worn book at night, her lips moving, her face soft in the firelight. She, in turn, learned him. He was not a savage. He was quiet. He was patient. When a mouse crept into the cabin, he didn't kill it. He caught it in his hand and released it outside, murmuring something in Apache. "Why?" she asked. "All life," he said, touching his chest, "is from Yusin, the giver. We do not waste." This from a man she'd been told was a bloodthirsty killer. One night, the pain from his side was bad. He was restless. Brett, desperate, didn't know what to do. She sat on the edge of the bed. My father," she said, her voice small. "He used to sing when I was sick." Taza watched her. "Sing," he said. Hesitantly, her voice cracking with disuse, she sang. It was an old, simple hymn, the only song of comfort she knew. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. She sang, her eyes closed, her loneliness pouring out into the notes. When she finished, there was a deep silence. She opened her eyes. Taza was watching her, his expression unreadable. "Your song," he said, his voice rough. "It is sad, like you." Brett stiffened. "I'm not sad." "Yes," he insisted, not unkindly. "You are alone, like me in San Carlos. A person with no people." A tear tracked, hot and sudden, down Brett's dusty cheek. She wiped it away angrily. "You don't know anything about me." "I know," he said, his voice soft. He reached out, his fingers hovering over her cheek, not quite touching. "I see." This, from a stranger, was more intimacy than she had ever known. He told her about his life. He was not just an Apache. His father, Dakota, was a great Nantan, a chief of one of the last free bands of Chiricahua. He wasn't just tracking Finch. He was on a quest to save his people, to get the gold back, to buy real weapons to fight for their freedom. And she told him about her, the lonely, cruel preacher, the death of her mother, the town that shunned her, the land she loved but couldn't make a living from. In the small, dark cabin, with Sheriff Vane circling like a vulture, two people from different worlds, two people who should have been mortal enemies, found the one thing neither had ever had: a friend. The quiet, however, was just the breath before the thunder. The new moon brought the cold, and the cold brought Silas Vane. Taza was healing. He could walk now, his movement still stiff, but the panther-like grace was returning. He'd sit by the window, hidden, watching the horizon, teaching Brett how to read the signs. "Rabbits run to the bush," he'd explained. "But see, that dust. It is low. A man on a horse. One man. He rides slow. He is looking." Brett, who had lived on this land her whole life, was seeing it for the first time through his eyes. One morning, Taza was sitting in the corner, restitching a moccasin, when he suddenly went rigid. He didn't make a sound, but Brett felt the change in the room. "What?" she whispered. "Haida," he breathed. "Many horses. They run." Brett ran to the window. In the far distance, a plume of dust was rising. Not a single rider. A posse. "He's coming," she said, her voice tight with panic. "He's coming back." "Vane," Taza said, his hand already on his knife. He stood up. "I will fight." "You'll die," Brett said, shoving him. No, you can't. Not here. Not like this. Where? He asked. The cellar was a trap. The crawl space was known. The barn, Brett said, her eyes wild. No, not the barn. The arroyo. The dry creek bed. It's deep. Go. Follow it to the mesas. Hide in the rocks. I'll stop them. No, Taza said, his face hard. He will hurt you. For me. He'll hurt me anyway, Brett screamed, pushing him toward the back door. He wants this land. He wants me gone. This is not new. Now go. Nagoda, she said, using the Apache word for go he had taught her. He looked at her, his black eyes burning with a conflict she couldn't name. He hated running, but he saw the truth in her words. He gave her one sharp nod. Be indestructible, he said, using a word she had taught him. Then he was gone, a shadow slipping out the back, moving low and fast toward the arroyo. Brett took a deep breath. She grabbed a handful of flour and smeared it on her face. She unpinned her hair, letting it fall, wild and unkempt. She tipped over a chair. When Vane and his 5 deputies, Finch was not with them this time, rode up, they found her looking like a madwoman, sweeping her porch with frantic, angry strokes. Sheriff, she said, her voice just a little too high. Back so soon? Vane dismounted, his face grim. Where is he, girl? Who? Brett asked, sweeping furiously. The rat? The gopher? The mule? The Apache! Vane roared. Don't play dumb with me. Jedediah Finch was found this morning, in his store, his throat cut, ear to ear. Brett's stomach dropped. What? You heard me. Vane grabbed the broom from her and snapped it over his knee. His safe was empty, all that gold he had, gone, and the only person who knew about it was his Apache partner. No, Brett whispered. That's not true. Finch shot him. So you do know him. Vane's eyes lit up with triumph. You've been harboring a murderer. He's not a murderer. Finch is dead, girl, and you're an accessory. Now, for the last time, where is he? He's not here. Then you won't mind if we look. Vane shoved past her, his men spreading out, tearing her small, neat cabin apart. They ripped the mattress from her bed. They smashed her jars of preserves. They emptied her flour sack onto the floor. They tore the wardrobe from the wall, exposing the hole Taza had made. Aha! A deputy yelled. Look at this, Sheriff! Vane strode over. He saw the hole, the crawl space. He was here. He turned, his face purple with rage. You lying! He's gone, Brett cried. He left days ago. He threatened me. He took my food and left. Vane looked at her, at the flour on her face, the wildness in her eyes. He almost believed her. Search the property, he ordered. The barn, the well, the arroyo. Find him. Brett watched in horror as one deputy, a young, eager one named Peterson, ran straight for the arroyo where Taza was hiding. No! Brett shrieked, running after him. Not the arroyo. It's snakes, rattlers. The nest it's huge. Peterson stopped, his hand on his pistol. Snakes? Ma'am. She's lying, Vane yelled. Get in there. I'm not. Brett grabbed Peterson's arm, her eyes wide with a very real, very sudden inspiration. It's my father. He fell in. A year ago. They bit him. It took him an hour to die. It's cursed. The young deputy looked at the dark, shadow-filled cut in the earth. He looked at Brett's mad face. He was a product of this land. He believed in cursed ground. He backed away. Ain't no Apache down there, Sheriff, Peterson called out, his voice uneasy. Nothing but snakes. Vane, furious, watched his deputy back down. He turned his attention to the barn. Fine, he growled. If he's not in the arroyo, he's in the barn. Burn it. What? Brett went cold. No, my mule, Barnaby. A small price to pay for justice, Vane said, a cruel smile on his face. And for your lies. No, please. Brett ran toward the lean-to, but a deputy grabbed her. Barnaby. Barnaby. Vane himself lit the torch. He held the burning rag to the old tinder-dry wood of her small barn. The wood caught with a whoosh, the flames licking up the side of the structure. Brett screamed, a sound of pure animal grief. She fought, kicking and scratching, but the deputy held her fast. Inside, Barnaby, her only friend for 10 lonely years, began to bray, a high-pitched, terrified sound. The braying was cut short. Brett went limp, the fight draining out of her. She just stared. The barn, her tools, her wagon, her mule. Everything she owned, everything that had connected her to this small, hard life, was turning to ash and smoke. Vane watched the flames, his face lit by the inferno. We'll be back, Miss Thorne, he said, his voice soft, victorious. When you're ready to sell the land. He and his men mounted up, riding away, leaving her in the dirt, silhouetted against her own funeral pyre. She knelt there for a long time, watching the flames, her face blank. The smell of burning hay and other things filled the air. She was no longer lonely. She was empty. She felt a presence beside her. She didn't have to look. Taza stepped out of the shadows of the arroyo, his face a mask of stone, watching the fire. He had heard her screams. He had heard the mule. He had seen her sacrifice. She had lost everything. For him. He looked at the ashes, then at the distant riders. Brett, he said, his voice flat. She didn't turn. She just stared at the smoking ruins of her life. They killed Finch, Taza said. I know. No, he said, turning her face to his. Vane. He killed Finch. For the gold. I saw. From the hills. Brett's mind pieced it together. He was in the store? I was watching, Taza said, his voice hard. Finch was a liar, but he was my target. I watched the store. Vane came. They argued about the gold. Vane. He cut him. He put my mark. He cut his throat. Like Apache. He had been framed. Vane had murdered Finch, stolen the gold, and was now using the murder to justify hunting Taza, and, by extension, terrorizing Brett off her land. It was a perfect, brutal plan. Brett looked at the burning barn. She looked at the man beside her. She had nothing left to lose. And, for the first time, everything to fight for. Where? She asked, her voice a cold, hard rasp. Where do your people live? Taza pointed south, toward the jagged purple peaks of the Dragoon Mountains. There, my home, Sierra D, the mountains of the people. Then we go, Brett said, standing up and wiping the soot from her face. We go now, and we take that bastard down. The lonely girl was gone. A different woman stood in her place. The journey to the Dragoon Mountains was a trial by fire. They left the smoldering ruins of Brett's life with nothing but the clothes on their backs, Taza's knife, and Brett's half-empty canteen. Taza was the guide, but Brett was the engine. The grief for her mule, her home, had been burned away, leaving a core of cold, hard rage. Taza, who had been raised to revere the warrior's spirit, had never seen it in a white woman. He watched her. She did not complain. When the terrain got rough, she tore her skirt into strips to bind her worn-out boots. When the water ran out, she didn't beg for more. She simply kept walking, her lips cracked and bleeding. Taza moved with a silent, fluid grace. He was still wounded, but the desert was his home. He taught her. "Do not walk," he whispered, as they crossed a barren stretch of rock. "You flow, like water, one foot, then the other. No wasted motion." He showed her how to find water, a soldier's sip, by digging in the damp sand of a dry riverbed. He showed her which plants were good to eat, the bitter, fibrous agave heart, and which would kill her. And he showed her how to be hunted. Twice, they saw Vane's posse. The first time, Taza pulled Brett into a narrow rock chimney, and they stood, pressed together in the dark, for 3 hours, listening to the horses pass, so close Brett could smell the sweat of the animals. She was pressed chest to chest with Taza. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart against hers. His hand was over her mouth, but his touch was not violent. It was protective. She found herself staring into his eyes, a foot away, and saw no fear. Only a calm, terrible focus. When the posse was gone, they separated, and the desert air felt cold between them. The second time, they were caught in the open, a high, flat mesa. Vane and his men were a mile distant, but they'd been seen. A shot rang out, a tiny puff of dust erupting at Brett's feet. "Run!" Taza yelled, grabbing her hand. They ran, but the horses were faster. "I can't," Brett panted, her side stitching. Taza didn't slow. He half dragged, half carried her. He veered right, toward a sheer cliff edge. "Taza, no," she screamed. It wasn't a cliff. It was a path, a spirit path, Taza called it. A narrow, winding goat trail that seemed to be carved into the rock face. He scrambled down it, pulling her after him. The posse thundered to a halt at the edge. They stared down the sheer 500-foot drop. They're gone," Deputy Peterson stammered, crossing himself. "They jumped." Vane stared at the empty space, his face contorted. He knew better. He knew they'd been tricked. But his horse and his men would not make that climb. "They're heading for the dragoons," Vane growled. "He's taking her to the stronghold. Fine. We'll find them. We'll find them all." That night, Taza and Brett huddled in a small cave, sharing the warmth of a tiny, smokeless fire Taza had made. Brett was shaking, the adrenaline wearing off. He won't stop," she whispered. "No," Taza agreed. "He has the gold. He thinks he can buy an army, buy your land. He will not stop. He killed Finch," Brett said, "and Barnaby. And he framed you." Taza looked at her. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair a wild tangle, her hands bleeding. "You are Shiji," he said, his voice quiet. "What?" "My friend," he said, searching for the translation. "No, more. My heart friend." He reached out, and with one finger, gently traced the line of soot on her cheek. "You have the Ndibini, the Apache heart. You are a warrior woman." Brett looked at him, at this man who was her enemy, her patient, her teacher, her savior. "And you," she said, her voice thick, "are not a savage." He smiled, a rare, breathtaking thing. "No, not today." They arrived at the stronghold 3 days later. Brett had expected, she didn't know. Tents, huts. She had not expected this. Hidden in a high box canyon, accessible only by a single, narrow guarded path, was a village. It was a rancheria. Dozens of wiki-ups, domed huts made of brush and hide, were scattered among the towering red rocks. Women tended fires, children played, and warriors, lean and hard, cleaned rifles, their eyes following her every move. Taza's people. A great cry went up when they saw him. "Taza! Taza has returned!" An older man, his face a roadmap of dignity and war, stepped from the largest wiki-up. He was tall, his hair gray, but his eyes were the same as Taza's, black and sharp. This was Dakota, Taza's father. Taza and his father spoke, a rapid-fire cascade of Apache. Taza's voice was urgent, angry. He pointed back the way they came. He pointed at Brett. Dakota listened, his face impassive. When Taza was finished, the old chief turned his gaze on Brett. It was the most terrifying, assessing stare she had ever endured. He looked right through her. "You," Dakota said, his English as clear and sharp as Taza's, "are the White Eyes woman. Inda East N. Why is she here, my son?" "She saved me," Taza said, his voice ringing with authority. "She hid me. She fought for me. She lost her home. For me. She is Shiji." Dakota looked at Brett again. "You saved my son. From the wolves." "Yes," Brett said, her voice small. "And from the Inda." "Yes." "Vane, the one Taza speaks of. He comes." "Yes," Brett said. "He has the gold. He will come to kill you all. To finish what he started." A murmur went through the warriors. They looked at Taza, then at Brett. An old woman, her face like wrinkled leather, came forward and spat at Brett's feet. "A white woman brings only death," she shrieked. Taza stepped in front of Brett. "She brings truth," he yelled. "Finch is dead. Vane killed him. Vane has our gold. He burns the homes of his own people. He is a snake. And he comes. This woman? Brett, she is one of us now. She warns us." Dakota raised his hand. Silence. "We will see," the old chief said. "We will prepare." He looked at Brett. "You will be watched." Brett was taken by the women to a small, empty wickiup. They gave her water and a stew that tasted like smoke and meat. They did not speak to her. They just watched. Brett Thorne, the lonely girl from Prospect's End, had found Taza's people, but she had never been more alone. War came to the Sierra Ndi 3 days later. Silas Vane was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. He didn't come with just his 5 deputies. He came with 20 paid mercenaries, a posse bought with Jedediah Finch's stolen gold. They were hard men, bounty hunters, and ex-soldiers, and they came armed for a massacre. They also brought a Gatling gun. The Apache lookouts, high on the cliffs, signaled the approach. The rancheria exploded into silent, practiced action. Women and children vanished into hidden caves. Warriors, Taza and Dakota among them, melted into the rock formations, rifles ready. Brett was grabbed by the old woman who had spat at her. "You, come," the woman hissed, pulling her toward the caves. "No," Brett said, pulling her arm free. "I'm not. I can't." She looked around, frantic. She saw Vane's men, hauling the heavy Gatling gun onto a flat ledge overlooking the main entrance to the canyon. They were setting up a kill box. "Taza!" she screamed, spotting him on a ledge above. "Taza!" He turned. "The gun!" she yelled, pointing. "The fast gun! The machine! They have it! On the ledge!" Taza understood. He'd seen the weapon. He knew what it could do. It would shred his warriors. He looked at his father. Dakota nodded. Taza and 5 warriors slipped from the rocks, disappearing like shadows, beginning a perilous, winding climb to flank the gun. Vane's men opened fire. The canyon erupted in gunfire, the bullets ricocheting with loud, whining pings. The Apache fired back. Single, precise shots. Vane, furious, roared, "Get that damn Gatling gun working, Peterson!" The young deputy, Peterson, the one who had feared the snakes, was fumbling with the ammunition belt. Brett watched from her hiding spot. She had to do something. She saw the main mercenary force, led by Vane, advancing up the narrow canyon pass, using the Gatling's covering fire to move. She knew this canyon. Taza had shown her the spirit path. She ran, not to the caves, but up. She scrambled up a path the women used for gathering herbs. It led her to a high, narrow overhang, directly above the path Vane and his men were taking, and it was covered in loose rock, a scree slope. The old woman who had tried to save her watched, her eyes wide as Brett began to push. She pushed a small rock, then a larger one. She strained, her muscles screaming, and shoved a small boulder. It rolled, gathering speed, and crashed onto the path below. Vane's men stopped, looking up, confused. It's a trap, one yelled. Brett pushed again, and this time the entire slope gave way. A river of rock and dust cascaded down the canyon wall, a miniature avalanche. It didn't hit Vane. He was too far back, but it buried his advancing line. Men screamed as they were swept off the path or crushed by the rocks. The path was blocked. The advance was broken. At the same moment, high above, Taza and his warriors reached the Gatling gun. Peterson saw them coming. He had time to get off one. Panic burst, firing wildly before Taza's knife was at his throat. Taza didn't kill him. He knocked him unconscious. The other mercenaries were not so lucky. The battle was over. Vane, seeing his men scattered, his ultimate weapon captured, and his path blocked, was trapped. He turned to flee, but Dakota and 10 warriors stepped from the shadows, blocking his exit. Silas Vane, the bully of Prospect's End, was alone. They brought him to the center of the rancheria. Dakota, Taza, and Brett. You, Taza said, his voice cold, murdered Jedediah Finch. It was him, Vane blustered. The Apache. I saw you, Taza said, his voice low. From the hills. I saw you. Take the gold. Vane's face went gray. You burned her home, Taza said, nodding to Brett. You killed her animal. You tried to kill my people. For this. Taza kicked the bag of gold Vane had been carrying, a bag that belonged to the Apache. He is Chizgid, Dakota said. He is less than a snake. Vane's fate was sealed. The Apache had their own justice. 2 moons later, the rancheria was at peace. The gold had been used, not for rifles, but for food, for blankets, for life traded fairly in Mexico. Brett was different. Her hair was braided, Apache style. Her skin was a deep tan. She wore a soft deer-hide dress the old woman, who now called her she, my daughter, had made for her. She was not lonely. She was Ndi. She was the people. She was sitting by the fire, grinding corn, when Taza sat beside her. He had been quiet since the battle, respectful, distant. Brett, he said, Taza, you are happy here? I am, at peace, she said. I am not watched. I am seen. This is true, he said. My father, Dakota, he sees you. My mother, she sees you. I see you. He took her hand, a hand that was no longer chapped and trembling, but strong and calloused. In your world, Taza said, struggling for the words. A man asks a preacher. He gives a ring. Brett looked at him, her heart starting a slow, heavy beat. I am not that man, Taza said, and you are not that woman. He held up his knife, the besh. This is my life, my grandfather's life. It protects. It builds. Then he held out his empty hand. I have no wickiup of my own. My father's is crowded. Brett looked at his empty hand, confused. I don't understand. A Ndi man, Taza said, his voice soft, when he chooses his one, he asks her, will you build with me? He looked into her eyes, his own black and intense, holding the entire vast desert. The ground is waiting. The poles are strong. But a wiki-up is not a home without the ISDN, without the woman. He held out his hand to her. Brett Thorne. Ndee Beanie, my heart friend, I ask this. Will you build with me? This was it. The proposal. Not of marriage, not of rings and property, but of partnership, a joint life, a shared home, a vow. Brett, the lonely girl, the outcast, the mad woman, looked at the warrior, the chief's son, the man who had seen her, truly seen her. She smiled, a real radiant smile, a smile that had been born in fire and blood. She placed her hand in his. Yes, she said. Yes, Taza, I will build with you. And so, the lonely girl from Prospect's End, the one who had nothing, finally found everything. She didn't find it in the world that rejected her, but in a world that embraced her, in the heart of a warrior who saw her strength. She and Taza built their home, a life of shared respect and a love stronger than the Red Rock Mountains around them. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West drama. This story shows that sometimes the greatest risks lead to the most beautiful rewards, and that home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person. If you loved Brett and Taza's story, please show your support. It helps our channel more than you know. Go ahead and hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a great story. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. We have so many more stories of love, drama, and adventure from the Old West coming your way, and you don't want to miss a single one. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next story.